Most men never ask the question directly. They meet a woman who has been single for 5 years, maybe 10, and they assume those years were emotionally neutral. They think she simply waited, quietly, patiently, like nothing inside her changed during all that time. But that is not how human beings work. A woman does not go years without intimacy, touch, desire, emotional closeness, or physical connection without developing survival mechanisms. Some become colder. Some become hyper-independent. Some learn how to separate sex from emotion so completely that vulnerability starts feeling unsafe. And some bury their loneliness so deep beneath work, routines, and distractions that even they stop recognizing it. That is the part nobody talks about. Because the woman you meet today may not be the woman she was before those years alone changed her nervous system, her expectations, and the way she experiences men. And if you do not understand what happened during those silent years, you may completely misunderstand the person standing in front of you. So before we begin, I want you to tell me something in the comments. Have you ever met a woman who had been single for years and felt like something about her emotional world had become harder to reach? Because what most men notice is only the surface. Society has created a very polished story around female singleness. You hear people talk about self-growth, healing journeys, career goals, solo travel, independence. Everyone celebrates the visible parts, but almost nobody talks about the invisible part, the biological part, the emotional part. The part that still exists after the dinner ends, the phone goes silent, and she climbs into an empty bed, night after night. And that silence matters more than people think. A woman does not suddenly stop being human because there is no man in her life. Her body still craves touch. Her nervous system still responds to closeness. Her mind still wants emotional intimacy, validation, affection, desire. Sexuality is not a switch that turns off when circumstances become inconvenient. It simply moves underground. That is why the waiting is never neutral. The longer someone lives without intimacy, the more their system starts adapting to the absence of it. Some women become emotionally restless without understanding why. Others become irritable, numb, anxious, or deeply distracted. Not because they are weak, because human beings were not designed to feel emotionally disconnected forever while pretending everything is perfectly fine. And here is the dangerous part most men miss. When desire has no healthy outlet, people do not just wait. They develop coping patterns, private habits, emotional defenses, entire identities built around surviving the absence. Silence does not erase desire. It only forces people to manage it in private. And once you understand that, you start asking a much more important question. What kind of woman becomes comfortable living that way for years? Not all female singleness comes from the same place. That is the first mistake men make. They see a woman alone for years and assume she simply hasn't found the right guy yet. Sometimes that is true. Many times it is not. Some women become trapped inside a transactional mindset. They stop viewing relationships as connection and start viewing them as evaluation. Every man is tested, measured, compared. He must constantly prove himself worthy of her time, attention, body, or emotional investment. The problem is that when a relationship starts feeling like a permanent audition, emotionally healthy men eventually walk away. Nobody wants to spend years trying to earn warmth from someone who treats affection like leverage. Some women are alone because fear has completely rewired the way they experience intimacy. Betrayal does that. Trauma does that. A painful divorce can do that. The woman who once trusted deeply and got emotionally destroyed rarely returns to the dating world unchanged. Part of her still wants closeness. Another part associates closeness with danger. So she keeps men at arm's length while secretly wondering why connection never fully develops. Then there are women trapped in outdated self-perception. This one is more common than most people realize. A woman remembers the kind of men she attracted at 23, But she struggles to accept that time changes the dating market for everyone. Instead of adapting, she keeps chasing an idealized fantasy that reality no longer supports. So every man feels disappointing because no real man can compete with nostalgia. And to be fair, not every woman alone is emotionally dysfunctional. Some consciously postpone relationships, career pressure, family responsibilities, healing after divorce, health issues. Real life exists. But even strategic singleness still shapes psychology over time. That is the part people avoid admitting, because whether her loneliness came from fear, standards, trauma, or choice, the emotional consequences still accumulate quietly beneath the surface. Some women are alone because they cannot trust men. Others are alone because no man can pass the audition. And eventually, both situations begin changing the way they see themselves. The human nervous system changes when intimacy disappears for long enough. Not immediately, quietly, gradually. That is why many women do not even recognize what is happening to them while it is happening. At first, the absence simply feels inconvenient. Then months pass, then years. Eventually, emotional deprivation stops feeling temporary and starts becoming a lifestyle, and the body keeps score the entire time. Some women become more emotionally reactive. Smaller frustrations hit harder. Patience shortens. Mood swings become more common. Others go in the opposite direction. They become emotionally flat. Harder to excite. Harder to reach. Harder to emotionally move. When the nervous system goes too long without affection, closeness, reassurance, or physical intimacy, it begins adapting to emotional isolation as the new normal. And that adaptation slowly affects self-worth. A woman may never say it out loud, but after years without feeling deeply desired, many begin questioning themselves in private. Am I still attractive? Am I still wanted? Am I becoming invisible? Then social comparison makes it worse. She watches friends get married, build families, receive affection openly, while she quietly learns how to normalize emotional starvation behind a composed face. That is why independence can be misleading. Some women are genuinely peaceful alone, but others are simply highly practiced at surviving loneliness without showing it. Those are not the same thing. The longer someone goes unseen, the harder it becomes to believe they are still worth choosing. And once that emotional emptiness grows large enough, people start searching for ways to regulate it. Not always healthy ways, not always conscious ways, but ways that allow them to function without confronting how disconnected they actually feel. That is where coping strategies begin entering the picture. One of the most common ways some women cope with long-term loneliness is by separating physical intimacy from emotional intimacy. In other words, they stop looking for connection and start looking for regulation. This is where casual arrangements begin. Sometimes it is a friend with benefits, sometimes an emotionally unavailable man, sometimes a married man who cannot offer commitment but can temporarily relieve the feeling of emptiness. The arrangement usually comes with rules: no pressure, no expectations, no vulnerability. Just enough closeness to quiet the body for a little while without risking emotional exposure. And in the beginning, it can feel empowering. A woman tells herself she is in control now. No attachment, no disappointment, no dependence on men emotionally. She gets the attention, the validation, the physical release, then returns to her independent life untouched. At least, that is what she believes. But the nervous system rarely separates sex and emotion as cleanly as people pretend it does. Over time, repeated emotional compartmentalization changes people. A woman who spends years teaching herself not to emotionally attach during intimacy may eventually struggle to emotionally attach even when she finally wants real love. Her body learned how to stay present physically while remaining psychologically guarded. That adaptation does not disappear overnight. And many men completely misread it later. They think she is naturally cold, naturally distant, naturally emotionally unavailable. What they are actually witnessing is survival behavior repeated long enough to become personality. A person who learns to survive without emotional attachment may stop knowing how to attach at all. Now, to be clear, not every casual arrangement destroys emotional health. Human beings are complicated. But the longer someone trains themselves to experience closeness without vulnerability, the more difficult genuine intimacy can become later. And this is where many men get confused, because the woman may look experienced, confident, sexually open even, yet emotionally she may trust intimacy less than ever before. So let me ask you something. Do you think casual relationships actually heal loneliness? Or do they simply numb it long enough to survive another week? Not every woman turns toward other people when loneliness grows unbearable. Some turn inward instead, completely inward. This is the quieter strategy, the invisible one. The version nobody talks about openly because it feels too private, too uncomfortable, too revealing. But it exists far more than most men realize. Many women learn how to satisfy themselves emotionally and physically without needing another human being involved at all. At first, it feels safer, cleaner, more controlled. No rejection, no emotional confusion, no risk of betrayal. She controls the timing, the fantasy, the distance, the outcome. And control can become addictive when vulnerability has hurt someone badly enough. This is also why fantasy becomes powerful. Not just physical stimulation, but emotional imagination. The mind creates scenarios that reality no longer provides. Desire becomes self-contained, predictable, safe. Over time, some women even start preferring controlled stimulation over real emotional intimacy, because real intimacy requires uncertainty, patience, and emotional exposure. And once someone becomes deeply attached to emotional control, relationships begin feeling emotionally exhausting. That is the hidden danger. Because physical release does not automatically solve emotional isolation. In fact, sometimes it intensifies it. The momentary relief fades, and the silence afterward feels even heavier than before. The body relaxes, but the loneliness remains untouched underneath it. Some people stop needing connection because control feels less painful. That sentence explains more modern relationships than most people are willing to admit. Again, this is not about judging women. It is about understanding adaptation. Human beings always find ways to regulate pain. The real question is whether the coping mechanism slowly teaches someone to avoid the very vulnerability required for genuine closeness later. And for some women, that answer becomes yes. Some women never cope through casual intimacy. Others never retreat into private fantasy. Instead, they redirect the energy completely. This is the woman who becomes obsessed with productivity. She works constantly, builds businesses, trains relentlessly in the gym, overcommits to routines, stays permanently busy. From the outside, she looks disciplined, focused, high value, emotionally strong. And sometimes she genuinely is. But sometimes the constant motion is serving another purpose entirely. Distraction. Because silence forces people to feel things they have spent years avoiding. A woman who never slows down never has to fully confront the ache underneath the movement. So she fills every hour, every weekend, every emotional gap. The body still wants connection, intimacy, closeness, affection. But instead of feeding those needs directly, she converts the emotional energy into achievement, structure, ambition, or self-improvement. And modern culture rewards this adaptation aggressively. People praise her independence, her discipline, her not needing anyone. But very few ask whether the independence is rooted in peace or emotional exhaustion. That distinction matters more than most men understand. Some women do not heal loneliness, they simply outwork it. Others numb themselves differently. Endless streaming, emotional eating, social media validation, attention online, constant stimulation, anything that creates enough dopamine to temporarily overpower emotional emptiness without requiring vulnerability from another human being. And over time, the pattern becomes identity. The woman starts believing she genuinely prefers emotional distance because distance feels familiar now, safe, efficient, manageable. But safety and fulfillment are not the same thing. A person can become incredibly good at surviving emotionally while still feeling profoundly disconnected underneath. And eventually, those survival patterns stop looking temporary. They start becoming permanent parts of personality. That is when the real complications begin. This is the part most men completely misunderstand. They meet a woman after years of singleness and judge her only by her surface behavior. She seems independent, guarded, emotionally difficult to read. Maybe she struggles with closeness. Maybe she pulls away after intimacy. Maybe she craves connection one moment and becomes distant the next. And men often assume that is simply her personality. Many times it is not. It is adaptation. Human beings adjust to whatever environment they survive in long enough. If a woman spends years emotionally protecting herself, eventually the protection stops feeling temporary. It becomes automatic. She no longer consciously decides to keep distance. Her nervous system does it for her. That is why some women struggle to receive genuine affection, even when they desperately want love. They became so used to handling life alone that emotional dependence now feels dangerous. Vulnerability feels unnatural. Needing someone feels weak. So the moment intimacy deepens, panic quietly appears underneath the surface. You see this especially in hyper-independent women. On the outside, they appear powerful, calm, self-sufficient. But many have spent so long surviving emotionally alone that partnership starts feeling like loss of control instead of emotional safety. And the tragedy is this. The very walls that protected her during loneliness may become the same walls preventing closeness later. A woman who trained herself to emotionally detach during casual relationships may struggle to emotionally attach in serious ones. A woman who spent years suppressing desire may struggle reconnecting to intimacy naturally. A woman who survived by avoiding vulnerability may unconsciously sabotage the very relationship she prayed for when she was lonely. The walls people build for protection rarely disappear when love finally arrives. That is why understanding a woman's history matters, not to shame her, not to punish her, but because survival patterns do not magically vanish the moment a relationship begins. And once people become emotionally attached to their defenses, they often create entire belief systems to justify keeping those defenses alive. That is where the conversation becomes even darker. After enough disappointment, some women stop protecting their heart and start protecting their worldview instead. This is where bitterness quietly turns into identity. You hear it in the language. All men cheat. Relationships only drain women. Men are emotionally useless. At first, these statements sound like opinions, but many times they are psychological defense systems disguised as confidence. Because if every man is the problem, then she never has to examine the walls she built herself. Now listen carefully. I am not saying bad men do not exist. They absolutely do. Some women carry legitimate wounds. Betrayal changes people. Emotional abuse changes people. Repeated disappointment can make anyone cynical. But unresolved pain has a dangerous habit of rewriting reality completely. And once someone emotionally invests in that narrative long enough, healing starts feeling threatening. Why? Because healing would require vulnerability again, accountability again, hope again. And hope becomes terrifying after years of emotional survival mode. When pain becomes identity, healing starts feeling like betrayal. That is why some women cling to emotional distance, even while claiming they want connection. The defense mechanism became emotionally safer than intimacy itself. And then one day, unexpectedly, a real relationship opportunity appears. A good man enters her life. someone patient, emotionally available, genuine. But years of adaptation do not suddenly disappear because the right person showed up. In many cases, that is when the deepest internal conflict finally begins. A lot of men assume that once a woman finally meets the right guy, everything naturally falls into place. They think attraction automatically restores intimacy. It does not. Because relationships do not erase conditioning overnight. A woman who spent years emotionally surviving alone often enters a new relationship carrying invisible habits she no longer notices herself. She may crave closeness deeply, then suddenly pull away the moment she receives it. She may want emotional safety but panic when someone finally gets too emotionally close. She may struggle to trust consistency because chaos became more familiar to her than peace. This confuses many men, especially emotionally healthy men. They show up honestly, communicate clearly, stay consistent. Yet the woman still seems emotionally restless, distant, or difficult to fully reach. What he often fails to realize is that he is not meeting the version of her that existed before the loneliness. He is meeting every adaptation those years created inside her. And adaptation leaves fingerprints everywhere, in the way she handles conflict, in the way she receives affection, in the way she responds after intimacy, in how quickly she expects disappointment, in how uncomfortable she feels relying on someone emotionally. Time alone does not automatically create wisdom. Sometimes it only deepens defense mechanisms. Now, to be fair, some women truly grow during singleness. They become more self-aware, more emotionally mature, more honest about what they need. But others simply become better at emotional survival while quietly losing the ability to fully connect. That is why history matters. Not because a woman should be judged for being single, but because patterns built during isolation rarely stay isolated. Eventually, they enter the relationship too. And if a man truly wants to understand the woman in front of him, there is one question more important than all the others. The wrong question is, does she have a past? Every adult has a past. The real question is, what did that past turn her into? That is the question emotionally intelligent men eventually learn to ask. Because two women can experience the exact same loneliness and emerge completely differently. One becomes wiser, softer, more self-aware. The other becomes emotionally armored, cynical, detached, and unable to trust intimacy anymore. The difference is not the pain. The difference is whether the pain was processed or simply survived. That is why you should pay attention to how a woman speaks about her years alone. Does she talk about them with clarity and honesty, or with bitterness and blame? Can she reflect on her patterns? Or does every story end with someone else being responsible for her emotional wounds? Those details matter, because unresolved pain always leaks somewhere, into communication, into trust, into conflict, into intimacy, into emotional availability. And this is where many men make a costly mistake. They become hypnotized by attraction and ignore emotional patterns completely. They focus on chemistry while overlooking psychological readiness for connection. A person's history matters less than the meaning they created from it. Never forget that line. You are not trying to find a woman with no scars. That woman does not exist. You are trying to find a woman who did not allow her loneliness, trauma, or emotional survival mechanisms to permanently disconnect her from intimacy itself. Because some people survive loneliness, and some become emotionally built around it. The uncomfortable truth is that years of loneliness change people. Not just women. People. But today, I wanted you to understand something most men never stop long enough to examine carefully. A woman does not spend years without intimacy, emotional closeness, physical affection, or deep connection without developing strategies to survive the absence. Some of those strategies create growth. Others create emotional distance so deep that even love struggles to cross it later. And if you ignore that reality, you will misunderstand the woman in front of you completely. because the issue is not whether she has been single. The issue is what those years trained her nervous system to become. Did the loneliness teach her self-awareness, emotional maturity, gratitude for genuine connection? Or did it slowly condition her to avoid vulnerability, suppress intimacy, and emotionally survive without needing anyone at all? That distinction changes everything. I have seen women become stronger through solitude, more grounded, more emotionally honest. But I have also seen women become so adapted to emotional isolation that healthy love started feeling unfamiliar to them. And that is the danger men need to recognize early, instead of discovering it after becoming emotionally attached. You cannot build intimacy with someone who secretly feels safer disconnected. So stop looking only at attraction. Start paying attention to patterns. Watch how she handles closeness. Watch how she speaks about trust, men, relationships, and her past. The truth is usually hidden there long before it appears in the relationship itself. And if this video made you see modern relationships differently, subscribe and share it with another man who needs this perspective. Then tell me in the comments something honestly. Do you think long-term singleness creates wisdom or emotional distance? Because the most dangerous thing about loneliness is not being alone. It is becoming so adapted to survival that real love starts feeling unnatural. Have you ever tried something simple in your relationship? You stop initiating sex for a while just to see what happens. And suddenly, nothing happens. Days go by, sometimes weeks. And you begin to wonder whether she even thinks about intimacy the way you do. For many men, that moment feels confusing and even a little painful, because it starts raising questions about attraction, chemistry, and whether something in the relationship has quietly shifted. But here's the truth that surprises a lot of men. The reason women rarely initiate sex often has very little to do with attraction itself. In fact, many men unknowingly create the exact dynamic that discourages women from initiating intimacy in the first place. And once you see how those dynamics work, you'll understand why it happens and how to change it. Let's start with a pattern many men create without realizing it. Imagine a typical evening. You're sitting on the couch. She leans into you. You wrap your arm around her. She rests her head on your shoulder. At first it feels warm and natural, just closeness. But then something happens. Your hand starts moving. The kiss gets deeper. The moment slowly turns into an attempt to push things further. Now, here's the problem most men never notice. If this happens every single time, a pattern begins to form in her mind. Cuddle leads to sex. Kissing leads to sex. Touch leads to sex. Over time, something subtle but powerful starts happening psychologically. She begins to avoid initiating intimacy altogether. Not because she doesn't enjoy closeness, not because she doesn't want you, but because she knows where it usually ends. This is a classic form of behavioral conditioning. When one action constantly leads to pressure or expectation, the brain learns to avoid starting that action in the first place. So instead of initiating affection, she waits. She lets you start things. Because if she doesn't begin it, she doesn't have to manage the moment where it suddenly turns sexual before she's ready. Many women actually want physical closeness during the day. They want to cuddle. They want affection. They want to feel close to you without it automatically turning into a sexual negotiation. But when every small gesture becomes a doorway to sex, something surprising happens. Affection disappears first, and when affection disappears, initiation disappears with it. In other words, the very pressure men create in order to get more intimacy often produces the opposite result. She stops initiating, not because she has no desire, but because starting intimacy feels like opening a door she may not want to walk through every time. And this leads to a deeper realization that most men have never been taught. Because the truth is, women experience sexual desire very differently from men. Most men grow up believing sexual desire works the same way for everyone. You see something attractive. You feel arousal. You want sex, simple, immediate, direct. For many men, desire behaves like a switch. It turns on quickly. But for many women, desire doesn't work like a switch. It works more like a slow ignition. Instead of spontaneous desire appearing out of nowhere, female desire is often responsive. It grows out of context, emotional atmosphere, and physical closeness. In other words, the sequence is often reversed. For many men, the order is desire first, intimacy second. For many women, the order can be connection first, arousal second, desire after that. This difference has been studied in modern sexual psychology. Researchers like Dr. Emily Nagoski, known for her work on female sexual desire, describe something called responsive desire, a pattern where desire develops in response to stimulation, closeness, or emotional connection rather than appearing spontaneously. That means many women don't start the evening already feeling turned on. They become turned on as intimacy builds. And this is where a lot of men accidentally sabotage the process. Because when a man rushes directly toward the end goal, he skips the very phase where female desire is still waking up. Think about the type of romantic or erotic content that many women enjoy. It rarely jumps straight into explicit action. There's tension, eye contact, slow moments, anticipation, a build-up. That build-up is not just storytelling. It mirrors how female arousal often unfolds in real life. But many men approach intimacy like a race with a finish line. They escalate quickly, they move fast, and without realizing it, they skip the emotional and sensory build-up that actually fuels female desire. Ironically, when a man learns to slow down, the dynamic begins to flip. When he allows moments to breathe, when he creates anticipation instead of rushing past it, when closeness doesn't automatically become pressure, something interesting starts happening. The tension begins to build on her side. She starts thinking about you later. She starts replaying moments in her head. And eventually, she becomes the one who starts leaning closer first. Because desire has had time to grow instead of being forced into existence. But even this psychological difference isn't the whole story. Biology also plays a powerful role in why men and women approach sexual initiation so differently. There's another factor quietly shaping this dynamic, and this one sits deeper than psychology. Biology, specifically hormones. One hormone in particular plays a major role in sexual drive and pursuit behavior: testosterone. Testosterone is strongly linked to libido. It influences the brain regions connected to reward, motivation, and sexual arousal. It also affects how quickly sexual desire is triggered. And this is where one of the biggest biological differences between men and women appears. Men produce significantly higher levels of testosterone than women. In fact, male testosterone levels can be several times higher on average. This hormone is responsible for many male sexual characteristics, but it also fuels a stronger baseline drive towards sexual pursuit. Higher testosterone is associated with increased sexual thoughts, stronger libido, and a greater tendency to act on sexual impulses. In simple terms, it creates urgency. This helps explain why men often feel desire more frequently and more suddenly. The brain receives a stimulus, something attractive, a physical cue, a visual trigger, and the system activates quickly. But for women, testosterone levels are much lower. Women do produce testosterone in the ovaries and adrenal glands, but in far smaller quantities. As a result, sexual desire tends to be less impulsive and less aggressive. It doesn't mean women don't experience desire. They absolutely do. But that desire is often less about immediate biological urgency and more about the environment around them. Where men often feel a strong internal push toward sex, women often respond more strongly to context. The emotional climate, the feeling of closeness, the sense of safety and attraction in the moment. So while a man might feel desire first and then look for an opportunity, a woman may experience desire after the environment has already become inviting. You could say the difference like this. Men often experience sexual urgency. Women often respond to sexual invitation. And when men misunderstand this difference, they sometimes assume something is wrong. They assume the attraction is fading. They assume their partner simply doesn't want them anymore. But in many cases, the real issue isn't attraction at all. It's that female desire often depends on something even more powerful than biology: emotional connection. There is something many men underestimate when it comes to female desire: emotional safety. For a lot of women, sexual openness doesn't begin in the bedroom. It begins long before that, in the emotional atmosphere of the relationship. A woman who feels valued, respected, and emotionally connected to her partner is far more likely to express her desire freely. But when that emotional connection weakens, sexual initiation often disappears with it. Think about how a typical day unfolds for many couples. You both wake up. You rush to work. You handle responsibilities. You deal with stress, deadlines, messages, problems. By the time evening arrives, she may already feel mentally drained. Now imagine that during the day there was very little emotional connection. No real conversation. No meaningful attention. No small moments where she felt seen or appreciated. Then later that night, physical intimacy suddenly becomes the focus. For many women, the emotional gap between those two moments feels enormous. It's not that she doesn't care about you. It's not that attraction has vanished. It's that her emotional system hasn't been engaged yet. Many men unintentionally treat their partner primarily as a sexual partner during intimate moments, but overlook the emotional foundation that makes those moments possible. For women, desire is often connected to feeling valued as a person first, feeling heard, feeling appreciated, feeling like her presence matters beyond physical attraction. When those emotional signals are strong, something interesting happens. Her defenses lower, her comfort increases, and with that comfort comes a willingness to express desire without hesitation. Because desire, for many women, grows in an environment where vulnerability feels safe. If a woman feels judged, ignored, or emotionally disconnected, she may still care deeply about her partner. But initiating sex requires a level of openness that doesn't exist in an emotionally cold environment. In contrast, when a woman feels emotionally secure, something shifts. She relaxes. She becomes more playful. She becomes more expressive. And eventually, she becomes more willing to take the first step herself. Because at that point, intimacy no longer feels like pressure. It feels like connection. But emotional safety isn't the only biological rhythm shaping female desire. There's another influence that men often overlook completely: timing. Women's bodies operate on a hormonal cycle that influences energy levels, mood, and sexual desire throughout the month. These changes are not random. They follow biological rhythms connected to fertility and hormone fluctuations. During certain phases of the menstrual cycle, libido can naturally rise. Around ovulation, when estrogen levels increase and the body enters its most fertile window, many women experience a noticeable shift. They may feel more flirtatious, more physically responsive, and more interested in intimacy. Some women even report feeling more confident, more playful, and more drawn to physical closeness during this period. In other words, their bodies are biologically more receptive to sexual interaction. But the opposite can also be true during other phases of the cycle. In the days leading up to menstruation, often referred to as PMS, many women experience fatigue, irritability, physical discomfort, or emotional sensitivity. During this time, sexual interest may drop significantly. It's not about attraction, it's about physiology. Hormones such as estrogen and progesterone shift throughout the month, influencing mood, energy, and the brain systems connected to desire. And on top of these biological rhythms, real life still happens. Stress at work, conflict with friends, a difficult day, mental overload. All of these factors can influence sexual mood as well. For many women, desire doesn't operate like a constant signal that stays at the same level every day. It's more like a tide that rises and falls depending on both biological timing and emotional context. Some days the conditions are naturally favorable. Other days, the system simply isn't there. Understanding this rhythm changes how you interpret her behavior. Instead of assuming rejection or loss of attraction, you begin to see that female desire often follows patterns that are cyclical and contextual. But even beyond biology and mood, there is another reason many women hesitate to initiate sex. And this one runs deep in the psychology of how women have been socially conditioned to approach intimacy. There is another reason many women hesitate to initiate sex, and it has very little to do with desire. It has to do with risk. For generations, the dating dynamic has been framed in a very specific way. Men are expected to pursue. Women are expected to be pursued. Even in modern relationships, that script still quietly shapes behavior. From an early age, many women are taught, directly or indirectly, that expressing too much sexual initiative can be interpreted in the wrong way. Too forward, too aggressive, too easy. Because of that, many women grow up learning to manage their sexual expression carefully. Not necessarily because they want to, but because of how it might be perceived. Now add another psychological layer to that. Rejection. For men, sexual rejection often hits the ego. It can feel embarrassing or frustrating, but it rarely attacks a man's core identity. For many women, the experience can feel different. Part of a woman's identity, historically and culturally, has been tied to desirability, the idea that being wanted is connected to her value. So when a woman takes the risk of initiating and the response isn't enthusiastic, the emotional interpretation can be much harsher. It doesn't just feel like a moment of rejection. It can feel like a judgment about her attractiveness, her femininity, or her worth. That emotional cost can be powerful enough to keep many women from taking the risk in the first place. So instead, they choose the safer route. They let the man initiate. That way, if intimacy happens, it happens without the vulnerability of having made the first move. And if it doesn't happen, they avoid the sting of personal rejection. This doesn't mean women lack desire. It means that expressing that desire sometimes carries a psychological risk they've been taught to avoid. And once that pattern becomes established in a relationship, it can quietly reinforce itself over time. She waits for you to initiate. You become used to initiating. And the dynamic stabilizes in that pattern. But there is another very practical factor that often kills sexual initiation long before any of these psychological dynamics even appear. Exhaustion. There is one more factor that quietly destroys sexual initiation in many relationships, and it's far less mysterious than most people think. Exhaustion. For many couples, especially those living together or raising a family, daily life comes with a long list of invisible responsibilities: work obligations, household chores, planning meals, managing schedules, taking care of children, remembering appointments, handling emotional conflicts in the family. A lot of this mental load often falls disproportionately on women. Even when both partners are working, many women still carry a large share of the organizational and emotional labor required to keep daily life running. Over time, that constant responsibility drains energy, and energy is the raw fuel of sexual desire. When the brain is overloaded with tasks and stress, the body naturally prioritizes recovery and stability over sexual arousal. Stress hormones like cortisol rise, mental fatigue increases, and libido quietly fades into the background. This is why a woman who feels overwhelmed by responsibilities may still love her partner deeply, still find him attractive, and still value the relationship. But at the end of a long day, Her mind and body simply don't have the capacity to shift into a state of desire. She's tired, not uninterested, and this is where many men misread the situation. They interpret the lack of sexual initiation as a lack of attraction. But sometimes the real problem has nothing to do with attraction at all. Sometimes the problem is that her energy has been spent long before the evening even begins. When a woman feels physically and mentally drained, sex becomes another task rather than a moment of connection. And when intimacy starts to feel like another obligation, initiation disappears almost completely. So now you can start to see the full picture. There are psychological reasons, biological rhythms, social pressures, and everyday exhaustion. But understanding the causes is only half the story. The real question is how to change the dynamic. Now that you understand the reasons behind the pattern, the next question becomes obvious. How do you change it? The answer is not about convincing a woman to initiate sex. You don't pressure desire into existence. You create the environment where it can grow naturally. The first shift is removing pressure from intimacy. When every hug, every kiss, and every moment of closeness immediately turns into an attempt to escalate, intimacy starts to feel like a negotiation. But when affection is allowed to exist on its own, without expectation, something powerful happens. Closeness becomes safe again. And once closeness feels safe, she becomes more willing to initiate it herself. The second shift is slowing down the pace of sexual escalation. Many men move quickly toward the final outcome. But when you slow the rhythm of intimacy, anticipation begins to build. Moments stretch longer. Eye contact lingers. Playfulness increases. And over time, that tension starts to move in both directions instead of only coming from you. The third shift is communication. Many couples never actually talk about their sexual expectations. A simple, honest conversation about desire, about what both of you enjoy, what makes each other feel wanted, and how intimacy fits into the relationship, can remove a surprising amount of confusion. Clarity creates comfort. Comfort creates openness. Another important factor is reinforcement. When she does initiate, even in a small way, your reaction matters. Appreciation encourages repetition. If she feels that her effort is welcomed and valued, she becomes more confident expressing that side of herself again. And finally, there is something many men overlook completely. Support outside the bedroom. When responsibilities are shared. When stress is reduced. When the relationship feels like a partnership rather than a burden. Energy returns. And when energy returns, desire often follows. Because the truth is simple. Most women don't resist intimacy. They respond to the emotional and physical environment around them. When that environment feels safe, relaxed, and connected, something shifts naturally. She no longer waits for the moment to begin. Sometimes, she becomes the one who starts it. Women rarely initiate sex for reasons most men never consider. It's not always about attraction fading. It's not always about desire disappearing. More often, it's a combination of pressures that slowly reshape the dynamic in a relationship. Sometimes it's the pattern where every moment of closeness automatically turns into sexual escalation. Sometimes it's the fundamental difference in how male and female desire actually works. Sometimes biology plays its part. Hormones, cycles, energy levels that shift throughout the month. And sometimes the explanation is far more human and ordinary. Emotional disconnection, social conditioning, or simply exhaustion from carrying too many responsibilities for too long. When you begin to understand these mechanisms, something important changes. You stop interpreting her behavior as rejection, and you start seeing the environment that shapes her desire. Because attraction inside a relationship rarely disappears randomly. It responds to the emotional climate two people create together. When a woman feels emotionally safe, when she feels appreciated beyond physical attraction, when intimacy doesn't feel like pressure but connection, her defenses start to lower, and something surprising begins to happen. She doesn't just respond to desire. She begins to express it. Sometimes subtly, sometimes playfully, and sometimes by being the one who reaches for you first. If this perspective shifted the way you see intimacy in your relationship, make sure you subscribe. This channel is dedicated to one thing: helping men understand the deeper psychology behind attraction, relationships, and female behavior. And now, I'm curious about your experience. Are you usually the one initiating intimacy in your relationship? Or have you found ways to create a dynamic where she starts it too? Share your thoughts in the comments. Because the most honest conversations about relationships often start right there. You had the date. You did everything right. The conversation flowed. The chemistry was there. The sex was good. She left your place smiling. And then, silence. No texts, no calls, no explanation. Here's the uncomfortable truth most men don't want to hear. If sex were enough, she wouldn't disappear after giving you her body. Women can sleep with a man and still feel nothing pulling them back. Attraction didn't fail you. Connection did. And no, I'm not talking about romance. Not money. Not muscles. There's one specific trigger in the female brain that hits deeper than lust. When you activate it, she doesn't just want you, she bonds to you. Not by choice, by biology. Sex excites her body. This rewires her nervous system. I'm telling you this as a woman who understands exactly how women attach and why they walk away from men who thought they did everything right. This isn't about simping, chasing, or emotional theatric. It's about learning how to hold emotional frame without losing your edge. If you want content that actually gives you leverage instead of illusions, hit like and subscribe now. This isn't entertainment. This is understanding the game, so you're no longer playing it blind. Let's break down what's really happening and why it changes everything. You were taught a very specific lie about attraction. Maybe not directly, maybe not in words, but through movies, social media, dating advice, and other men who were just as confused as you. Look better, make more money, be more confident, be more impressive. And if you stack enough of those traits together, a woman will stay. Here's the part no one says out loud. Most men who get left behind weren't unattractive. They weren't awkward. They didn't mess it up in the bedroom. In fact, many of them did everything right on paper. They got the date. They got the chemistry. They got the sex. And then they got nothing. Because getting a woman's body has never been the real challenge. Keeping a place in her emotional world is. That's the gap most men don't see until it hurts. Women don't walk away because sex was bad. They walk away because nothing lingered after it was over. No imprint. No emotional echo. No reason for her nervous system to pull her back toward you when you're not there. You can excite her for a night and still be forgettable by morning. That's the brutal distinction. Attraction isn't measured by how intense the moment was. It's measured by what remains when the moment ends. And most men leave no residue behind. They leave no emotional signal strong enough to compete with her independence, her options, her life. So she doesn't stay. She doesn't chase. She doesn't explain. She simply moves on. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. The men who lose women this way usually believe they were exciting, fun, confident, even dominant. They confuse stimulation with impact. They think desire equals attachment. It doesn't. A woman can desire you and still feel nothing tying her to you. She can enjoy you and still feel safer walking away than staying connected. That's why this feels so confusing from the male side. You felt something happen. She didn't feel something settle. And that difference changes everything. She didn't leave because you weren't exciting. She left because nothing in her stayed with you. To understand why excitement fades but attachment lingers, you have to stop thinking in terms of romance and start thinking in terms of chemistry. Not metaphorical chemistry. Actual brain chemistry. Most of what men call attraction runs on dopamine. Dopamine is the hit, the rush, the spike. It's released through novelty, flirting, sexual tension, sex itself. It's what makes your heart race and your focus narrow. And dopamine is powerful, but it's temporary. High, crash, gone. That's why lust burns hot and fast. Dopamine doesn't bond. It motivates. It pushes someone to chase a feeling, not a person. Once the feeling fades, the pull fades with it. No matter how intense the night was, dopamine doesn't give her a reason to return when the stimulation is over. Oxytocin works differently. Oxytocin is released when a woman feels emotionally safe, when she feels seen instead of evaluated, when her nervous system relaxes around you rather than staying alert. It's the same hormone involved in long-term bonding, trust, and attachment. It's what turns "this was fun" into "this feels right." And here's the part most men miss. Oxytocin doesn't feel dramatic. It feels calming, grounding, familiar. It doesn't spike. It settles. When oxytocin is activated, her body starts associating you with safety and regulation. Not excitement alone, but relief. Not stimulation, but comfort. Her system begins to register you as someone she can lower her guard around. That's when attachment starts forming. She doesn't just like you, her body remembers you. This is why a woman can walk away from incredible sex without looking back, and still find herself thinking about a man who didn't try to impress her at all. One gave her dopamine, the other gave her oxytocin. Dopamine excites her. Oxytocin imprints you, and imprinting isn't a conscious choice. It's not something she decides logically. It happens beneath thought, beneath language, beneath intention. Her nervous system makes the call long before her mind explains it. So when men say, "I don't understand, the chemistry was insane," they're usually describing dopamine. And when women say, "I don't know why, I just feel comfortable with him," they're describing oxytocin. One fades quickly. The other rewires attachment. Once you understand that difference, a lot of confusion disappears. And you start to see why excitement alone never makes a woman stay. But safety makes her bond. You've probably lived this one. The date went well. The vibe felt easy. The sex wasn't awkward. It was good. She laughed. She stayed the night. She kissed you goodbye. And then the next morning, nothing. No good morning, no follow-up, no slow fade, just silence. From the male side, this feels brutal because your mind is replaying the highlights. You're thinking about the connection, the intimacy, the way she responded to you. But while you're replaying the night, she's already emotionally gone. Not because she's cold, not because she's heartless, and not because you did something wrong. She disappeared because nothing anchored her to stay. Sex, by itself, doesn't create meaning. It creates sensation. And sensation fades fast once the body returns to baseline. If there's no emotional signal beneath the physical experience, her nervous system has no reason to pull her back toward you. So when the stimulation ends, so does the attachment. This is where most men misread what happened. They assume ghosting is a judgment of their performance. It isn't. It's a lack of emotional gravity. You didn't repel her. You simply didn't register deeply enough to matter. Think about it this way. Her body experienced pleasure, but her system never relaxed. She enjoyed the moment, but she never felt safe enough to settle. And without that sense of settling, there's no internal pull to reconnect. That's why explanations never come. From her side, there's nothing to explain. No unresolved tension. No emotional thread left hanging. The night closed cleanly. And here's the hard truth men avoid. Women don't stay because something felt good. They stay because something felt grounding. Because being with you lowered their internal noise instead of adding to it. If nothing in her nervous system softened around you, she won't return. No matter how confident you were. No matter how good the sex was. No matter how right everything seemed. Ghosting isn't rejection. It's absence of attachment. And until you understand that distinction, this pattern will keep repeating itself. With different women, same ending. Let me show you how this plays out in real life, because theory only clicks once you see the contrast. Picture the first man. On paper, he's everything most men think women want. Tall, well-dressed, successful. He plans impressive dates, orders confidently, speaks with certainty. From the outside, he looks like a win. Friends would tell her she's lucky. Other men would assume he has it handled. And yet, something is missing. Every conversation stays on the surface. When she shares something personal, he responds correctly, but not emotionally. He hears her words, but nothing in him registers how she feels. There's no judgment, but there's also no depth, no resonance, no sense that she's actually being received. Being with him feels polished and strangely empty. Now contrast that with the second man. He isn't flawless. He's not flashy. He doesn't overwhelm the room when he walks in. But when she talks, he's present, not performative, not trying to fix or impress. He notices the shift in her tone. He asks questions that aren't scripted. When she jokes darkly, he doesn't correct her. He understands her humor. And when she opens up emotionally, he doesn't rush to solve it or change the subject. He stays, calm, grounded, unthreatened by her feelings. Something subtle happens here. Around him, her nervous system slows down. She doesn't feel evaluated. She doesn't feel like she has to maintain an image. She can drop the mask without being punished for it. And that sense of permission, that feeling of being emotionally seen without being managed, changes how her body responds. This is where attachment forms, not because he's better on paper, but because being with him feels regulating. Over time, she finds herself thinking about him more, missing his presence, not his validation, wanting to share things with him before anyone else, and she might not even be able to explain why. From the outside, it looks irrational. From the inside, it feels inevitable. She didn't feel more attracted in the usual sense. She felt at home, and that feeling, comfort without boredom, safety without control, is rare. When a woman finds it, her system doesn't let go easily. That's why one man gets replaced quickly, while the other becomes the standard she compares everyone else to. This is where most men misunderstand what emotional safety really is. They hear the word safe and immediately think weak, passive, predictable, nice in a way that kills desire, so they push against it. They stay guarded, detached, overly dominant, because no man wants to be the guy she feels comfortable with, but doesn't want. But emotional safety has nothing to do with softness. It's about steadiness. A man who creates emotional safety isn't chasing approval. He isn't over-explaining himself. He isn't trying to perform masculinity or prove his value. He's grounded in who he is, and that groundedness transmits something powerful to a woman's nervous system. Calm. When you're emotionally solid, she doesn't feel rushed. She doesn't feel tested. She doesn't feel like one wrong word will change your mood or threaten your interest. That predictability at the emotional level, not the behavioral one, is what allows her to relax. And when she relaxes, she opens. This is where the power shift happens. A man who provides emotional safety sets the pace. He doesn't need to push intimacy forward because her system begins to move toward him naturally. She shares more. She invests more. She becomes more responsive, not because he demands it, but because being with him feels regulating instead of draining. This kind of presence is rare. Most men are either emotionally distant or emotionally needy. One makes her feel unseen. The other makes her feel responsible. Neither creates safety. But the man who can stay present without grasping, who can listen without fixing, lead without controlling, becomes someone her body trusts. And trust is leverage. not the manipulative kind, the biological kind. Because once a woman associates you with emotional stability, she stops scanning for exits. She stops bracing herself. She stops keeping one foot out the door. Her defenses lower, not because she's convinced, but because her system no longer feels the need to protect her. That's when attachment deepens. Not through intensity, through consistency. The man who makes her feel safe doesn't rush the connection. He controls the pace by not needing the outcome. And that quiet confidence, that lack of urgency, is what gives him influence without effort. The man who makes her feel safe controls the pace. Here's where a lot of men go wrong after hearing all this. They hear emotional connection and immediately swing to the other extreme. They start oversharing, over-explaining, unloading their past wounds like intimacy is built through confession alone. They mistake vulnerability for depth and intensity for closeness. And it backfires. Emotional connection is not emotional dumping. Telling her everything you've been through doesn't make her feel closer to you. It often makes her feel responsible for you. And responsibility is the fastest way to kill attraction. When a man trauma dumps early, texts constantly for reassurance, or needs her to regulate his emotions, her system doesn't relax. It tightens. She feels pressure instead of safety, obligation instead of desire. That's not bonding. That's burden. Women don't pull away because men are emotional. They pull away because the emotion is unstable, because it leaks urgency, because it signals that he needs her presence to feel okay. And neediness, no matter how softly it's packaged, feels heavy. What women respond to is presence. The ability to be emotionally available without being emotionally dependent. A man who can listen without collapsing into the story. Who can care without losing his center. Who can hold space without needing something back in return. That kind of emotional regulation is attractive because it communicates strength at a nervous system level. It tells her, I'm steady. You don't have to manage me. And when she doesn't have to manage you, she can relax into herself. That's the difference most men miss. They think opening up means giving more. In reality, it means staying grounded while she opens up. It means not hijacking the emotional moment with your own insecurities. It means allowing closeness to develop without rushing to secure it. Presence creates pull. Neediness creates pressure. A woman wants to feel connected to a man, not responsible for him. She wants to feel met, not leaned on. When you understand that distinction, emotional connection stops repelling women and starts drawing them in naturally. Presence is attractive. Neediness is not. At this point, the question isn't whether emotional connection matters. It's how to create it without losing yourself in the process. Because here's the truth most men never hear. Emotional bonding is not a personality trait. It's a skill. And like any skill, it can be practiced without turning you into someone you're not. It starts with curiosity that isn't strategic. Not questions designed to impress, but questions that reveal identity. The kind that invite her to step out of autopilot. When you ask a woman who she really is beneath her roles, she feels seen instead of assessed. And being seen is one of the fastest ways to create attachment. But connection doesn't come from questions alone. It comes from how you respond. Most men hear words. Very few hear emotion. When you reflect how she feels instead of parroting what she says, her system registers resonance. She doesn't feel like she's talking at you. She feels like she's connecting with you. That sense of emotional attunement builds trust without effort. Then there are shared emotional anchors, private jokes, small rituals, moments that belong only to the two of you. These don't need to be dramatic. In fact, the smaller they are, the more powerful they become. They create memory, and memory creates meaning. Over time, thinking of you triggers a feeling, not just an image. Another crucial piece most men get wrong is the urge to fix. When she vents, she's not asking for solutions. She's asking to be understood. The man who can sit with her discomfort without trying to control it signals emotional leadership. He shows that he's not overwhelmed by emotion, his own or hers. That steadiness is deeply attractive. And finally, there's restraint. The less you try to impress her, the safer you feel. Performance creates pressure. Authentic presence creates ease. When you're not trying to win her, she stops feeling like she's being evaluated and starts feeling like she's being invited. This is the paradox. Emotional bonds form fastest when you're not chasing them. You don't create connection by sacrificing your frame. You create it by staying centered while allowing closeness to develop naturally. That balance, openness without need, interest without urgency, is what separates men who are remembered from men who are replaced. Emotional connection isn't about giving more. It's about holding steady while something deeper forms. When a woman truly bonds with you, the entire dynamic changes, quietly but completely. She doesn't suddenly announce it. She doesn't make a dramatic declaration. She simply starts moving differently. Her desire deepens, not louder, not needier, deeper. Sex becomes less performative and more present. There's more eye contact, more openness, more willingness to give without being asked, because she's no longer protecting herself from you. Her loyalty shifts too, not in the sense of obligation, but orientation. You become the person she thinks of first, the one she wants to tell things to, the one she compares others against without realizing she's doing it. Even when you're not around, your presence lingers because her body has learned that being connected to you feels regulating. And vulnerability follows naturally. She shares more of herself, not because you pulled it out of her, but because she feels safe enough to let it surface. When a woman bonds at the nervous system level, she stops managing how she's perceived. She doesn't need to impress you. She doesn't need to stay guarded. She trusts that who she is will be received, not judged or used. This is where men often misunderstand what's happening. They think she's staying because they did something right, or because they finally said the right thing, or because they won her. But bonding doesn't work that way. She's not staying because you convinced her. She's staying because her body chose you. That choice shows up as ease, as consistency, as a quiet pull that doesn't need to be chased or reinforced. You're no longer trying to hold her attention. You already occupy a place inside her emotional world. And notice what isn't happening here. You're not chasing. You're not begging. You're not over-explaining your value. You're being chosen. This is the level most men never reach because they keep trying to stimulate desire instead of cultivating attachment. They confuse intensity with depth and urgency with connection. But the man who understands bonding doesn't rush. He doesn't force. He allows her system to settle. And once it does, it doesn't want to leave. She doesn't stay because she should. She stays because her body feels right with you. By now, you should see the pattern clearly. Sex opens the door. But emotional connection is what makes her lock it from the inside. Most men spend their lives trying to be more exciting, sharper, louder, more impressive. And they keep losing women not because they're unattractive, but because nothing about them feels settling. Nothing tells her nervous system, you're safe here. That's why the cycle repeats. Great night, strong chemistry, silence afterward. Not because she's broken, not because dating is unfair, but because stimulation alone never creates attachment. Real attraction isn't noisy. It doesn't announce itself with drama or urgency. It's quiet. It's slow. It's the feeling of ease that grows when a woman doesn't need to protect herself around you, when her body stops scanning for danger, when being with you feels better than being alone. That's what makes a man unforgettable. If you don't understand this, you'll keep confusing desire with connection. You'll keep chasing intensity wondering why it never turns into loyalty. And you'll keep telling yourself the story that women are unpredictable, when in reality, their behavior follows a very consistent emotional logic. But once you understand how bonding actually works, you stop chasing, you stop proving, you stop trying to secure outcomes that were never meant to be forced. You become the man who stays calm while others grasp, present while others perform, chosen while others compete. If this shifted how you see attraction, hit subscribe. If you've lived the experience of doing everything right and still losing her, leave a comment. You're not alone, and you're not wrong for wanting clarity. Any man can touch her body. Very few know how to stay in her nervous system. Women don't reject men the way men think they do. They don't sit you down. They don't explain. They don't give you closure. They pull away quietly, while you're still texting, still showing up, still believing you're in progress. The energy gets colder, the replies get shorter, and without realizing it, you're no longer being chosen. You're being kept. Most men don't lose a woman because they did something wrong. They lose her because they never noticed the exact moment her interest died, and by the time they feel it, it's already over. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Women give away their level of interest almost instantly. Not with words, but with behavior. If you don't know how to read it, you end up investing where respect is already gone. If you do, you stop wasting emotional energy and take your power back. Women aren't confusing. They're consistent. What confuses men is that they keep listening to words instead of watching patterns. In this video, I'm breaking down 5 instant signs that reveal when a woman isn't interested, so you're never left guessing where you stand. Each one shows you exactly how she's positioning you in her mind. If this kind of clarity matters to you, like the video and subscribe. This channel is for men who want to understand women without losing themselves. And it starts by seeing what's right in front of you. Most men grow up believing one simple rule. If a woman isn't interested, she'll say it. She'll be honest, direct, clear. That belief is comforting and completely wrong. Women rarely reject men with words. They reject them with behavior, quietly, gradually, without ever announcing it. And this is where so many men lose power without realizing it, because they keep waiting for a verbal answer that is never coming. Here's the part no one prepares you for. Saying no costs women something. It creates tension. It invites confrontation. It risks backlash. So instead of closing a door outright, most women leave it slightly open. Not because they want you, but because keeping options costs them nothing. They avoid the word no to preserve choice. They soften their disinterest to avoid conflict. And they allow just enough attention to keep validation flowing. From the outside, it looks confusing. From the inside, it's very consistent. This is why men stay longer than they should. They keep explaining, keep adjusting, keep giving more, thinking effort will turn ambiguity into desire. But attraction doesn't grow from negotiation. It fades when a man ignores what's already being shown. Behavior is the truth language here, always has been. When interest is present, it shows up naturally, through attention, warmth, investment, and ease. When interest is gone, it doesn't disappear loudly. It withdraws in small, deniable ways. And the man who understands this doesn't argue with reality. He reads it early. Power doesn't come from forcing clarity out of someone who benefits from staying vague. Power comes from recognizing patterns before emotional investment turns into emotional debt. The strongest men aren't waiting to be chosen. They're observing whether a woman is choosing them at all. Once you stop expecting honesty in words, you start seeing honesty everywhere else. In how she looks at you, in how she responds, in how she prioritizes, or doesn't. And when you learn to trust behavior over hope, you stop chasing explanations, you stop performing for approval, You stop offering effort where interest has already expired. That shift alone changes everything because now you're no longer reacting. You're reading the situation as it is and deciding accordingly. And that brings us to the first place women reveal the truth long before they ever say it out loud. Number 1. Her eyes are already leaving. Before a woman pulls away with words, she pulls away with attention, and attention always shows up in the eyes first. When a woman is genuinely interested, her focus settles. Her gaze stays with you. Not because she's trying to be polite, but because nothing else in the room feels more relevant than the man in front of her. But when interest drops, her eyes stop landing and start scanning. She looks past you instead of at you, over your shoulder, toward the door, toward movement, toward possibilities. Her attention fractures, and it's not subtle once you know what you're looking for. The eyes don't linger. They dart. They disengage. They move like she's already somewhere else mentally, because she is. Men often misread this. They assume distraction means nerves, shyness, or boredom that can be fixed with better conversation. So they talk more, they explain more, they try harder, and that's the mistake. A woman doesn't look away when she's deciding how to connect with you. She looks away when she's deciding what else might be better. You'll see it everywhere once you stop ignoring it. At a bar, she keeps glancing around every time someone walks in. At a coffee shop, her phone comes out mid-conversation, not because it rang, but because her interest did. In texting, she leaves your message unread while staying active everywhere else. That's not busyness. That's priority. Here's the part most men don't want to accept. Women look at what they're still considering. When she's interested, her eyes naturally come back to you. When they don't, it's because she's already evaluating other options, and the more you push when her eyes are elsewhere, the lower your value drops. Attention can't be negotiated. It responds to presence, not pressure. The strongest move in this moment isn't to compete harder. It's to notice faster. When you pull your energy back instead of chasing her attention, something shifts. You stop feeding an interaction that's already losing momentum. You stop auditioning. And suddenly, the dynamic changes. Not because you demanded anything, but because you removed what was being taken for granted. A man who doesn't chase wandering eyes becomes the man whose presence is felt when he's no longer trying to be seen. And that's when interest either recalibrates or disappears completely. Either way, you win by not lying to yourself. Number 2, her voice loses emotional color. A woman's voice will always tell you how she feels before her words ever do. You can hear attraction. You can hear curiosity. And you can hear when interest has quietly drained out of the interaction. When a woman is into you, her voice carries movement. It rises and falls. It speeds up. It softens. There's warmth in it. An unforced liveliness that doesn't need effort. That's dopamine at work. Interest stimulates energy, and energy changes tone. But when that interest fades, the voice flattens. Responses get shorter. The pace slows. The tone turns neutral, almost mechanical. Not angry, not emotional, just empty. And this is where men misinterpret what's happening. They tell themselves she's tired, stressed, busy, having a long week. Anything except the truth. But listen carefully to the contrast. She sounds animated with her friends, engaged on the phone, alive when talking about something that excites her. Then she turns to you, and suddenly the color disappears. Same woman, same day, different energy. That's not exhaustion. That's selective disengagement. Texting works the same way. When interest is there, messages carry rhythm. Emojis appear naturally. Words stretch. Replies feel present. When interest drops, communication gets stripped down to the bare minimum. One-word answers. Delays without explanation. Conversations that feel like obligations instead of exchanges. And the worst thing a man can do here is overcompensate. He starts adding more enthusiasm to fill the gap. He becomes more expressive to balance her flatness. He tries to revive something that's already losing oxygen. But attraction doesn't respond to pressure. It responds to polarity. When one side drains, the other side leaning in only accelerates the imbalance. Silence, restraint, and emotional self-control do more than excitement ever could in this moment. When you stop rewarding low energy with high effort, you change the dynamic. You communicate, without saying a word, that you're not here to carry an interaction alone, and that either forces her interest to reappear or it reveals that it's already gone. Both outcomes save you time. Both protect your position. A man who doesn't chase emotional scraps becomes the man whose presence is felt when he withdraws it. And that quiet shift sets the stage for something most men never see coming. The moment when her tone doesn't just flatten, but starts placing you beneath her. There is a very specific moment where everything quietly shifts, and most men miss it completely. It's not when she leaves. It's not when she ghosts. It's not when she says she's confused. It's the moment you start giving more to compensate for what she stopped giving. You feel the change before you understand it. The warmth is gone. The ease is gone. And instead of stepping back, you lean in. You explain more. You soften your boundaries. You try to be more understanding, more patient, more accommodating, hoping that effort will restore what disappeared. That's the pivot. That's where power leaks out. Men are taught that persistence equals strength. But in attraction, persistence in the face of withdrawal reads as insecurity. The more you explain yourself, the more you negotiate for connection, the more you reveal that you're invested in an outcome she's already drifting away from. And right here, without a single argument, your position changes. Number 3, her tone starts placing you beneath her. Tone isn't just sound, it's hierarchy. When a woman respects you, her tone carries openness, curiosity, softness. There's space for you in it. But when she no longer fears losing you, that tone sharpens. She interrupts you. She sounds impatient. She responds with clipped answers. She sighs. She rushes you. Nothing overt, nothing dramatic, just enough edge to test whether you'll accept being spoken to differently. And most men do. They brush it off. They rationalize it. They tell themselves she's just stressed. But what she's actually doing is recalibrating the dynamic, seeing how much distance she can create without you pushing back. Here's the part that stings. Women don't lower their tone with men they value. They lower it with men they believe will stay anyway. Watch the contrast. Notice how she speaks to someone she wants to impress. Then notice how she speaks to you. That difference is information. And it's more honest than anything she'll ever say. The mistake men make here is continuing to invest while their status is being quietly downgraded. They reward dismissiveness with patience, disrespect with understanding. And every time they do, the imbalance locks in deeper. Respect doesn't come from demanding better treatment. It comes from refusing to participate when the standard drops. Silence does more than arguments ever could. Pulling back does more than pleading. Calm withdrawal communicates something words never will. This version of you doesn't get access to me. And that's the moment the dynamic either corrects itself or ends. So ask yourself honestly, why are you still investing where respect is already gone? Number 4, her body is closing, even if her mouth isn't. A woman can say the right things and still be telling you no. Her body will always be more honest than her words, because it doesn't negotiate, it reacts. When interest is present, the body opens naturally. When it's gone, the body pulls away before the mind ever explains why. This is instinctive, not calculated, and that's why it's so reliable. When a woman is drawn to you, her body orients toward you without effort. Her shoulders face you. Her torso leans in. Her feet point in your direction. There's ease in how she occupies space around you. She isn't guarding herself. She's available. When that changes, Everything subtly shifts. Her arms cross, her legs angle away. She leans back instead of forward. She creates small barriers, holding a drink between you, adjusting her bag, turning slightly toward the room instead of toward you. None of it is dramatic, but all of it is deliberate on a biological level. Men often ignore these signals because her words haven't changed yet. She's still being polite, still saying yeah or sure or maybe. And that politeness keeps men leaning in when they should be stepping back. But here's the truth most men miss. Women can say yes out of courtesy. Their bodies never do. Watch how this plays out. On a date, the first half feels open. Conversation flows. She leans closer. Then something shifts. The chair moves back an inch. Her posture closes. She stops mirroring your movements. That's not random. That's withdrawal. In group settings, it's even clearer. Instead of angling toward you, she angles toward her friends. She leans into them, not you. Physical proximity follows interest. Distance follows disengagement. Even in texting, this shows up. Responses stall. Plans become vague. Maybe replaces specifics. That's physical distance translated into behavior. The same closing, just expressed digitally. The mistake men make here is pressing forward. They move closer when she moves back. They increase effort when her body is signaling retreat. And every step forward she didn't invite lowers perceived value. Attraction breathes through space. When you ignore her need for distance, you smother what little interest might still exist. The man who notices this early doesn't argue with it. He mirrors the distance. He relaxes back. He stops pushing. And that simple restraint does something powerful. It forces honesty into the dynamic. Because when you stop advancing on someone who's retreating, their interest either returns or reveals that it was already gone. Both outcomes protect you. Number 5. Zero investment is the loudest rejection. This is the strongest sign of all because it removes all ambiguity. When a woman is interested, she invests. She asks questions. She adds energy. She participates. Interest naturally creates effort. When that effort disappears, the message is already clear. And yet, this is the sign men resist accepting the most. Instead of effort, you start getting placeholders. Short replies, delayed responses, conversations that never go anywhere. She answers, but she doesn't engage. She reacts, but she doesn't initiate. You carry the interaction while she simply receives it. This isn't confusion, it's positioning. Modern dating calls it breadcrumbing, giving just enough attention to keep you present, but never enough to move forward. From a power perspective, it's simple. She's keeping you warm while she waits to see if something better shows up. Look at how it plays out. You ask questions. She answers without asking anything back. You suggest plans. She says, maybe, we'll see, or I'll let you know. Specifics disappear. Commitment is postponed. Momentum dies slowly, but deliberately. And the most revealing part? She's not absent. She's active. Just not with you. She's online. She's posting. She's engaging elsewhere. So when men say, she's just busy, what they're really doing is protecting themselves from the truth. Because admitting she's choosing not to invest is uncomfortable. Here's the insight most men never hear. Attention that costs nothing has no value. When you continue giving time, validation, and emotional energy to someone who isn't matching it, you teach her exactly how little effort is required to keep you. You lower your own price by offering yourself at a discount. Women don't respect access that doesn't have conditions, and they don't fear losing what never asks for investment in return. The shift happens when you stop filling the silence, when you end conversations instead of dragging them, when you stop chasing clarity from someone benefiting from your uncertainty. Not as punishment, but as self-respect. A man who requires mutual investment doesn't need to announce it. He demonstrates it by what he no longer gives away freely. And here's the part that changes everything. Most men are afraid to pull back because they think it guarantees loss. But the truth is, staying when there's no investment guarantees something worse. You stay visible, available, and easily replaceable. When you step back, one of two things happens. She steps forward, or she disappears. Both outcomes tell you exactly where you stand, and both save you from continuing to invest in a position you were never meant to hold. There's a reason some men never get breadcrumbed, never get kept warm, never get slowly faded out. It's not because they're louder, smoother, or more aggressive. It's because they move through relationships with a different internal posture. They don't chase interest. They screen for it. When you look at the 5 signs together, a pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The eyes wandering, the voice going flat, the tone turning sharp, the body pulling away, the effort disappearing. None of these are random. They're all responses to one thing: how available you are without requiring anything in return. Women don't test men they fear losing. They test men they believe will stay, no matter how little they give. And this is where everything locks in. The man women respect doesn't demand clarity. He doesn't ask for reassurance. He doesn't argue with mixed signals. He pays attention once and adjusts accordingly, not emotionally, strategically. He doesn't over-explain himself when energy drops. He doesn't negotiate when tone shifts. He doesn't lean in when interest pulls away. Instead, he withdraws access. That doesn't mean he becomes cold or resentful. It means he has standards. It means his time, attention, and emotional presence aren't free samples. They're given in response to reciprocity, not hope. This is the shift from tactics to identity. When you stop asking women to choose you and start observing whether they already are, your entire experience changes. You're no longer reacting to signals. You're filtering for alignment, and women feel that immediately. Because the rarest thing in dating isn't confidence, it's selectiveness. A man who can walk away from low interest without drama becomes the man whose presence carries weight. Not because he's playing games, but because he's no longer playing himself. And once that identity settles in, you don't need to memorize signs anymore. You recognize the pattern early. You respond calmly, and you never find yourself wondering why you keep ending up in the same position. Women don't walk away from men suddenly. They leave quietly, long before the goodbye ever happens. By the time most men realize something is wrong, the decision has already been made. Not in words, but in behavior. Interest didn't vanish overnight. It withdrew in pieces. Attention faded. Tone shifted. Effort disappeared. And the men who get hurt the most are the ones who kept investing, hoping things would go back to how they were. This is the real divide. On one side is the man who keeps giving, keeps adjusting, keeps waiting, until he's drained and confused. On the other is the man who notices early, responds calmly, and refuses to stay where he isn't valued. The difference isn't confidence. It isn't looks. It isn't luck. It's awareness and the willingness to act on it. If you've ever felt like you were doing everything right and still not being chosen, this is why. You weren't failing. You were staying too long after the signs were already there. And the moment you stop doing that, everything changes. Because when you no longer chase interest, you stop rewarding indifference. When you stop rewarding indifference, respect either shows up or the situation removes itself. Both outcomes protect you. If this perspective resonates, subscribe to the channel. This space is for men who want clarity instead of confusion, strength instead of self-betrayal, and standards instead of hope. And if you've recognized one of these signs in your own life, leave a comment. Awareness starts with honesty. Share this with the man who keeps asking himself, why does he want to believe it or not? Most men ignore the early signs and end up blindsided, wondering how they missed the truth staring them in the face. Don't let that be you. In this video, I'm going to expose 5 signs she's seeing other people, And once you recognize them, you'll never have to question where you stand again. Here's what most men never realize. Women rarely reject directly. Instead, they sideline. They delay. They distract. They keep you guessing. It feels confusing, but it's not. It's intentional, and it's how they keep options open. The problem is, men want to believe the words instead of seeing the actions. That blindness is costly. But if you know how to read the patterns, everything becomes obvious, and you'll never waste time again. If you're ready to see what others ignore, hit like and subscribe right now. And I'm curious, what's the subtlest red flag you've ever picked up on? Share it in the comments. It might just save another man from falling into the same trap. Stay with me, because up next, I'll reveal the hidden dynamic in modern dating that explains why so many men feel like they're always competing and still feel one step behind. We live in an era where dating feels more like a marketplace than a connection. Swipe left, swipe right, an endless scroll of faces, each promising something better, shinier, more exciting. For women, this flood of attention can feel flattering. For men, it often feels like stepping into a crowded arena, competing against dozens of unseen rivals. You're not just talking to her, you're unknowingly up against every other man who slid into her messages that day. And that's where the tension begins. You start off strong, sending texts, making plans, investing energy. But slowly, a question creeps in. Am I the only one, or just one of many? That quiet uncertainty eats at you when she takes hours to respond, when she says she's busy, but her social media shows otherwise, when you feel like your effort is being weighed against a dozen other men. Imagine this. You're texting her consistently, doing everything right, yet it feels like waiting in line for a table that never opens up. You see other men being seated while you're stuck in limbo, wondering if your turn will ever come. That's the modern dating game, filled with false starts, endless distractions, and women who may not even realize they're spreading their attention too thin. The truth is, if you don't learn how to see the reality behind her actions, you'll end up wasting time, confidence, and emotional energy on someone who was never truly invested in you. So how do you cut through the noise and see the truth? Let's start with the first sign. Number 1. She avoids seeing you. This is one of the clearest signals a man can't afford to ignore. When a woman is genuinely interested, she'll carve out time for you, even in the middle of a packed schedule. When she wants to be with you, there are no excuses, no endless maybe next week messages. She'll find a way. But when she doesn't show up, when plans are postponed, rescheduled, or conveniently cancelled over and over again, that's not busyness, it's avoidance. And avoidance is often a cover for divided attention. She's keeping her schedule open for someone else. Think about it. A man who matters to her isn't put on hold. He isn't left waiting for that elusive day when her calendar magically clears up. If she keeps telling you she's too busy to meet, but she still manages to go out with friends or post about her weekend adventures online, you're not dealing with bad timing. You're dealing with misplaced priorities, and you are not one of them. Picture this. You suggest grabbing dinner. She agrees in theory but never confirms. The night comes, she vanishes with a last-minute excuse. You try again the next week. Same story. After a while, you realize you're chasing shadows. She's not rejecting you outright, but she's not committing either. That limbo is where countless men lose weeks, even months of their lives waiting for a woman who's already moved on emotionally. Here's the hard truth. If she really wanted to see you, nothing would stop her. She'd skip a night out, rearrange her schedule, or even sacrifice sleep just to spend time with you. That's what attraction does. It pulls people together. If you don't feel that pull from her, it's because she's being pulled elsewhere. This isn't about demanding all of her time. It's about recognizing whether she values any of it enough to give it to you. When she doesn't, You're left holding on to excuses instead of experiences. And that's the moment to ask yourself, if she's not showing up for me, who is she showing up for? But let's say you do manage to see her every now and then. The next question becomes just as important. Is your connection actually moving forward, or are you stuck in the same place? Number 2, there's no progress. Relationships, even in their earliest stages, are meant to move forward. The rhythm may vary. Some connections move quickly, others more slowly, but there's always a sense of growth. More conversations, deeper intimacy, introductions to her world. When that growth is missing, when everything feels stalled in place, it's a sign you may not be the only one she's seeing. Think about the pattern. You talk, you text, maybe you've gone on a couple of dates. But weeks pass and nothing changes. You're not meeting her friends. You're not invited into her life. There's no hint of a future, no movement toward exclusivity. You're locked in a holding pattern, circling the same airspace with no permission to land. Why does this happen? Often it's because she's keeping her options open. She's not ready to cut ties with other men because she's still evaluating. You're not the priority. You're part of the rotation. And that lack of commitment shows up as stagnation in your connection. Here's the psychological truth. When a woman sees you as someone she wants long-term, she starts weaving you into her reality. She'll drop hints about the future. She'll introduce you to the people close to her. She'll let you in on parts of her life she doesn't share with just anyone. If none of that is happening after weeks or months, she's not seeing you as her future. She's keeping you as an option. Imagine putting in effort, paying attention, showing consistency, yet months later you realize you're in the exact same place as day one. No forward motion, no deeper bond. That's not bad luck, it's by design. She doesn't want to move forward with you because she's still moving forward with others. The most painful part? A man can waste enormous amounts of energy here, thinking if he just tries harder, if he just proves himself more, things will change. But they don't. Because progress isn't something you can force. It's something she must want with you. Remember this. A woman who sees you in her future will start weaving you into her present. If she's not doing that, then the writing is already on the wall. And when progress stalls, something else always creeps in. Distance. Number 3, she becomes distant. Closeness doesn't just vanish without a reason. When a woman is genuinely drawn to you, her warmth shows in the way she texts, the tone of her voice, the excitement in her eyes when you meet. But when that warmth suddenly cools, when her presence shifts from engaged to detached, it's rarely random. Something else, or someone else, has entered the picture. This is one of the most disorienting signs for men because it often happens without warning. One week, she's laughing at your jokes, sharing stories, making you feel like the connection is growing. The next, her messages shrink to one-word replies. Her availability evaporates, and she seems emotionally checked out. It leaves you questioning yourself. Did I do something wrong? But the truth often lies elsewhere. Her attention has been redirected. Modern dating makes this shift even more likely. Dating apps never close. Her phone is a constant stream of notifications and new options. A woman who once lit up when your name appeared on her screen may now be distracted by someone else's message. She may still reply, but her energy tells the real story. Cold, delayed, minimal effort. Imagine sitting across from her at dinner. A week ago, she leaned in, hanging on to every word. Tonight, she's scrolling through her phone, distant, uninterested. You sense it immediately, but you hesitate to accept it because denial is easier than admitting she's already pulled away. Here's the harsh truth. When a woman grows distant without explanation, it's because her emotions are being invested elsewhere. That doesn't always mean she's already with another man, but it does mean she's exploring that possibility and you're slipping down her list of priorities. And this is where men often sabotage themselves. They respond to distance by chasing harder, texting more, trying to win her back. But that only confirms her decision, because genuine attraction doesn't need to be chased. When she's distant, the message is clear. She's no longer as invested in you. A woman's warmth doesn't fade without a reason. If she's pulling away from you, she's leaning towards someone else. And when that happens, you'll notice something even harsher. You're no longer the priority. Number 4, you're just an option. One of the hardest truths for a man to accept is realizing he isn't her priority. He's just part of her backup plan. You can feel it in the dynamic. You're the one reaching out. You're the one suggesting plans. You're the one investing time, energy, and thought into the connection. And in return, minimal effort, delayed responses, half-hearted enthusiasm. This imbalance is not accidental. It's a reflection of where you stand. A woman who's genuinely interested won't leave you carrying the weight of the connection alone. She'll meet you halfway, sometimes even more. But when she treats your effort as optional, it's because she sees you as optional. Think about it. Do you find yourself checking your phone, waiting for her to initiate, only to realize she never does? Do plans only happen when you push for them? Does she vanish for days, then reappear just enough to keep you hooked? These are not signs of genuine interest. These are signs you've been placed on the bench while someone else is playing the main game. Psychologically, many women keep options around for attention, validation, or as emotional safety nets. It doesn't mean she's malicious. It means she hasn't decided to choose you. And until she does, you'll always be competing with invisible rivals you can't see. Here's the painful cost. When you stay in this dynamic, you start draining yourself. You pour energy into someone who gives you crumbs in return. Over time, your confidence erodes. You begin questioning your worth, thinking maybe if you just do more, she'll finally see you. But that day never comes, because you were never positioned as the priority. The truth is simple. If you feel like an option, it's because you are one, and no man who respects himself should tolerate that role. This isn't about arrogance, it's about boundaries. When a woman treats you like a side choice, the strongest move you can make is to pull back. Stop auditioning for a spot in her life. The moment you do, you'll see clearly that her lack of investment wasn't about you. It was about her decision to keep you in reserve. And the cruelest part? When you're stuck as just an option, you'll always feel confused. Number 5. Confusion equals clarity. Here's a reality most men avoid facing. If you constantly feel confused about where you stand with her, then the answer is already clear. You don't stand anywhere that matters. A woman who values you won't leave you guessing. She'll make it obvious through her actions, her consistency, and the way she integrates you into her life. The uncertainty you feel isn't a puzzle to solve. It's the message itself. Think about how different it feels when someone is truly invested. You don't need to overanalyze every text. You don't wonder if she'll cancel last minute. You don't question whether she sees you as important because she shows it. Her attention, her effort, her time, they remove the confusion. The opposite is just as telling. If you're stuck in constant doubt, that's not bad communication. That's her lack of commitment. Picture a man who spends 6 months in a limbo relationship. They talk, they go out occasionally, but he never knows where he stands. He's told, "Not yet," or "I'm not ready," over and over again. Then one day he discovers she's been dating someone else the entire time. The confusion wasn't an accident. It was the cover story for her indecision. And he wasted half a year of his life waiting for clarity that never came. Here's the painful truth. Real interest doesn't create chaos. It creates certainty. If you have to ask, what are we? The answer is already not much. If you lie awake at night, wondering whether she sees a future with you, The answer is probably no. And men pay a heavy price for ignoring this. They lose time, months or even years locked in cycles of mixed signals. They lose confidence, thinking maybe they're not good enough, when the issue is her lack of choice, not their lack of value. And worst of all, they lose opportunities with women who would actually prioritize them, because they're stuck waiting for crumbs of attention from someone who won't. Remember this: confusion is not a stage in building a healthy relationship. Confusion is the answer. If you're confused, she's not committed. Period. So what should a man do when he sees these signs? That's where the real shift happens. When you strip everything down, it comes to one undeniable reality. Actions always speak louder than words. A woman can tell you she's busy. She can tell you she's interested. She can tell you to be patient. But if her actions don't match her words, that contradiction is the only truth you need. This is where so many men fall into the trap. They cling to what she says, while ignoring what she does. They hold on to promises, excuses, or sweet talk, hoping it means something. But hope is not a strategy. Observing her behavior is. If she doesn't show up, if she doesn't make room for you, if she doesn't invest, then you already have your answer. And that answer demands a response from you. Because the real question isn't, is she seeing someone else? The real question is, why are you tolerating behavior that tells you she's not choosing you? Here's how a man reclaims control. First, stop chasing women who don't prioritize you. The more you pursue someone who treats you like an afterthought, the less respect she has for you. Second, pull back your energy. Invest it where it's valued, not where it's drained. A woman who's serious won't need constant reminders of your worth. She'll recognize it immediately. Third, reclaim your time and self-respect. Every hour wasted on someone who doesn't choose you is an hour stolen from building your confidence, your goals, and your future. The truth is sharp, but freeing. The moment you stop tolerating confusion, you become unstoppable. You stop living in reaction to her mood swings and mixed signals, and you start living from a place of clarity and strength. And that's the shift that changes everything. You're no longer the man begging for attention. You're the man who recognizes his value and refuses to settle for less. And that leads us to the final message. You've now seen the 5 undeniable signs that she's likely seeing other people. She avoids spending time with you. Your connection doesn't progress. Her warmth turns to distance. You're treated like an option instead of a priority. And worst of all, you're left in a fog of confusion. Each of these signs tells the same story. You're not at the center of her focus. And here's the truth that most men don't want to face. When a woman really wants you, you don't have to decode signals. You don't have to second-guess her words or chase for scraps of attention. She makes it known. She invests. She prioritizes. Anything less is not interest. It's distraction. The message is clear. If she leaves you feeling uncertain, then you are not her choice. And if you're not her choice, it's time to make yourself the choice. Stop waiting. Stop negotiating for scraps of time and attention. Start reclaiming your power by walking away from anyone who can't give you the clarity and respect you deserve. The strongest men are not the ones who convince every woman to stay. They're the ones who know when to leave. They don't beg to be chosen. They choose themselves first. And that's exactly what makes them magnetic to the right kind of woman. So if these signs opened your eyes, don't just let this be another video you watch and forget. Act on it. Shift your mindset. Protect your time, your confidence, and your energy. And if you found value here, take the next step. Hit subscribe, drop a comment, and share this with a man who needs to hear it. Because knowledge alone isn't power. Applied knowledge is. And the moment you apply it, you stop being the man who waits to be chosen, and you become the man who chooses. Most men think cheating begins with a hotel room, a hidden message, or another man's name flashing across a phone screen. No. It starts much earlier than that. It starts the moment her energy towards you changes and your peace quietly disappears. And the dangerous part is this. She may still be calling you babe, still sitting next to you at dinner, still acting normal enough to make you question your own instincts. That's how a lot of men lose themselves. Not because they were blind, but because they kept ignoring what they already felt. A woman rarely betrays a man suddenly. First, she disconnects emotionally. Then her behavior starts shifting in ways most men never notice until it's too late. In this video, I'm going to show you 5 hidden signs she may already be cheating. Not the obvious signs every man looks for, but the subtle psychological changes that reveal when her loyalty has already started dying behind the scenes. And once you understand them, you'll never look at mixed signals the same way again. Before we go deeper, take 1 second to like this video, subscribe, and let me know what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this message is reaching, because men everywhere are dealing with the same quiet confusion, just in different rooms, different cities, different relationships. And if this topic already feels personal, comment, I felt it. Now stay with me, because the first sign is subtle, and most men mistake it for something positive. The first hidden sign is when she suddenly becomes a little too comfortable. And I need you to pay attention here, because this is where a lot of men get fooled. Most men expect a cheating woman to become nervous, secretive, protective over her phone, distant in obvious ways. But many women do the exact opposite. They become strategically relaxed. At first, it actually feels like the relationship is improving. She starts volunteering little pieces of information you never asked for. She casually mentions a male co-worker's name without hesitation. She leaves her phone sitting face down on the table and acts completely calm. Maybe she even tells you who texted her before you ask. And because you're a good man, your brain interprets that openness as reassurance. But sometimes it's not reassurance. Sometimes it's psychological camouflage. You see, when a woman starts emotionally stepping outside the relationship, she knows the biggest risk is not getting caught physically. The biggest risk is looking suspicious. The moment you become alert, her freedom shrinks. So instead of acting guarded, she starts feeding you controlled honesty. Tiny harmless truths designed to lower your defenses. That's why some men completely miss the shift. They think, if she was cheating, she wouldn't be this open. Meanwhile, the emotional intimacy between them is quietly dying in the background. And that's the detail most men ignore. Because real honesty creates closeness. Performed honesty only creates comfort. A woman who genuinely feels connected to you becomes emotionally warmer, more present, more invested in your peace. But a woman managing appearances becomes smooth, rehearsed, careful in a different way. Her answers sound almost too clean, too prepared, too emotionally balanced. Have you ever noticed how some people over-explain small things nobody questioned? That's not always innocence. Sometimes it's anxiety trying to look relaxed. She might casually say, "Oh, Jake texted me about work again. He's so annoying." Meanwhile, what she's really doing is normalizing his presence in your mind before you ever become suspicious of it. And slowly, your instincts begin to fall asleep. That's why I always tell men this. Don't just watch transparency. Watch emotional closeness. Because a woman can become more verbally open while becoming emotionally unavailable at the exact same time. That contradiction matters. Maybe she tells you more stories now, but touches you less. Maybe conversations sound lighter, but connection feels colder. Maybe she's physically present while emotionally somewhere else entirely. And deep down, you feel it, even if you can't explain it logically yet. This is where many men make their first mistake. They stop observing because they think the relationship feels safe again. They mistake reduced tension for genuine intimacy, but fake calm is still distance. And I'm not telling you to become paranoid. I'm telling you to become aware. Don't interrogate her. Don't start checking phones like a detective destroying his own dignity. Just observe patterns. Observe energy. Observe whether her openness actually brings you closer or simply keeps you quiet. Because the calmer she suddenly appears, the more carefully you should watch what's disappearing emotionally behind the scenes. And once this performance stops being enough to quiet her guilt, something even more dangerous usually begins. She starts turning the suspicion onto you instead. The second hidden sign is when she suddenly becomes suspicious of you for no clear reason. And this is one of the most psychologically manipulative phases, because it completely shifts the emotional pressure off her and onto you. Out of nowhere, she starts asking strange questions. Who were you texting? Why did you come home so late? Why do you seem distant lately? And you're sitting there confused because nothing about your behavior actually changed. But hers did. This is where many men get trapped emotionally because they immediately go into defense mode. They start over-explaining themselves. They start proving loyalty that was never questioned before. They hand over their phone. They reassure her endlessly. They become desperate to protect trust they never broke in the first place. And the moment that happens, the balance of power changes. Because now, instead of quietly observing her behavior, you're busy defending your own innocence. That's exactly what projection does. You see, guilt has weight. And when someone is carrying hidden guilt, the mind naturally looks for a way to release pressure. Some people confess, some withdraw emotionally, and others project their behavior onto the person closest to them. In simple terms, she starts treating you like the guilty one because facing her own actions feels too uncomfortable internally. It's emotional misdirection. While you're explaining yourself, she's relaxing. While you're trying to calm her fears, she's buying herself more emotional space. And if you're not careful, you slowly become the man apologizing for crimes you never committed. That's the part that destroys a lot of good men psychologically, not the cheating itself. The confusion. Because confusion makes a man question his instincts. Confusion makes him abandon his emotional center just to restore peace. And manipulative dynamics thrive inside confusion. Have you ever noticed how some arguments suddenly leave you defending yourself, even though the conversation started about her behavior? That's not accidental. A skilled manipulator knows that the best way to escape accountability is to emotionally exhaust the other person first, so she creates emotional smoke. And once the smoke fills the room, clarity disappears. You'll notice something else too. Her accusations often feel emotionally disconnected from reality. She becomes suspicious without evidence. She reacts strongly to harmless things. Sometimes she even studies your reactions more than your actual behavior. Because what she's really looking for is relief from her own internal guilt. And here's the dangerous part. The more loyal you are, the easier you become to manipulate emotionally in this stage. Good men hate being misunderstood, so they over-explain, they overcorrect, they try harder, they become softer, more accommodating, more emotionally available. Meanwhile, the woman projecting onto them often loses even more respect during that process. That's why you must stay grounded here. Do not become emotionally reactive every time she throws suspicion at you. Do not sit in emotional court, defending yourself for hours just because she suddenly feels insecure. Calm men see clearly. Emotional men become easy to control. And I want you to remember this line because it will save you years of emotional damage. Accusations without evidence are often confessions wearing a disguise. Not always, but far more often than most men want to admit. So, if you've ever apologized for something you never did just to restore peace, I want you to understand something tonight. Peace built on false guilt is not peace. It's emotional surrender. And once projection becomes normal inside the relationship, the next thing that usually dies is respect. The third hidden sign is the one most men feel the deepest, even if they struggle to explain it out loud. She starts losing respect for you in subtle, quiet ways. Not all at once. Slowly. like a slow leak in a tire that eventually leaves the entire relationship flat. At first, it seems small, a sarcastic comment here and there, an eye roll when you speak, a dismissive tone during conversations that used to feel warm. She interrupts you more often. She stops listening carefully. Your opinions begin sounding annoying to her instead of valuable. And eventually, your presence starts feeling like an inconvenience instead of comfort. This is where many men become emotionally desperate without realizing it. Because respect is emotional oxygen for a man in a relationship. Once it starts disappearing, he can feel the shift immediately, even if he cannot explain it logically. He starts trying harder, talking softer, giving more, apologizing faster, hoping he can somehow return things back to the way they used to feel. But here's the painful truth. You cannot negotiate respect back into existence, and the more a man begs for it emotionally, the faster it dies. Now let me explain the psychology underneath this, because this part matters. When a woman begins emotionally disconnecting or crossing boundaries behind your back, guilt starts creating internal tension inside her. And human beings naturally look for ways to justify behavior that conflicts with their self-image. So her mind starts rewriting you. Suddenly, your flaws become bigger. Your mistakes become more irritating. Your weaknesses become impossible for her to ignore. Not because you changed overnight, but because her perception of you needs to shift in order for her betrayal to feel emotionally justified. This is why some women become strangely critical right before or during emotional cheating phases. You've changed. You're too controlling. You don't make me happy anymore. You're too sensitive. Notice something important here. These statements are often emotionally vague, hard to solve, hard to defend yourself against. That's because the goal is not resolution. The goal is emotional distancing. If she can mentally downgrade you enough, her guilt becomes lighter. That's the hidden mechanism most men never understand. Disrespect is often emotional preparation for betrayal. And the saddest part? Many loyal men respond to disrespect by becoming even more emotionally available. They think if they love harder, stay calmer, give more reassurance, or become more patient, the warmth will return. But attraction does not grow through emotional self-erasure. The moment a man starts performing for approval, he quietly abandons his own power. And women feel that shift immediately. That's why I tell men this all the time. Never chase respect. Observe it. Protect it. Because once someone starts repeatedly humiliating you emotionally, they are revealing how disconnected they've already become internally. Now, does this mean every disrespectful moment equals cheating? No. Relationships have conflict. Human beings get frustrated. But consistent disrespect without accountability is different, especially when it appears alongside emotional distance, projection, and unexplained behavioral shifts. That combination matters. And here's another truth most men need to hear. A woman preparing to betray you often starts emotionally rewriting the relationship before she physically crosses the line. In her mind, she needs a story where you are no longer the man worth protecting. That's why the warmth disappears first. And this is exactly where many men lose themselves completely. They become reactive, angry, defensive, desperate to regain control emotionally. But emotional chaos only accelerates the collapse. Calmness is power here. Not weakness, not silence from fear. Controlled composure. Because a man who remains emotionally grounded while disrespect is being thrown at him becomes very difficult to manipulate psychologically. And nothing unsettles a manipulative person more than someone they can no longer emotionally control. But once respect dies, peace usually dies right beside it. And that's when the relationship starts filling with constant emotional chaos. The fourth hidden sign is when the relationship suddenly starts feeling emotionally exhausting all the time. Not because of one major event, but because tension slowly becomes the new normal. She gets irritated faster now. Tiny things trigger arguments that never used to matter. Your tone bothers her. Your silence bothers her. The way you answer questions bothers her. Some days, it feels like you can't even breathe correctly around her without setting something off. And at first, most men blame themselves. Maybe she's stressed. Maybe work is overwhelming her. Maybe she's tired. Maybe you actually have changed somehow. So you become more careful, more emotionally cautious. You start walking on eggshells trying to avoid conflict. But that's exactly how emotional chaos traps people. Because once a relationship enters this stage, you stop focusing on truth and start focusing on survival. Your goal becomes avoiding the next argument, instead of understanding why the emotional atmosphere changed in the first place. And that shift is dangerous. You see, when a woman is emotionally involved elsewhere or internally disconnected from the relationship, guilt creates pressure inside her. And pressure always looks for release. One of the easiest ways to release guilt is by creating conflict intense enough to justify emotional distance. In other words, if she can convince herself that the relationship feels toxic, cold, frustrating, or emotionally draining, then pulling away from you starts feeling emotionally reasonable in her mind. That's why the fights often feel strangely disconnected from reality. A small misunderstanding becomes a massive emotional explosion. A harmless comment becomes proof you don't understand her. A quiet night suddenly turns into an argument about your entire character. And the more emotionally reactive you become, the easier it becomes for her to paint you as the problem. That's the trap. Chaos creates emotional confusion. Confusion weakens clarity. And once clarity disappears, manipulation becomes easier to hide. Have you ever noticed how some relationships slowly turn into emotional war zones where one person is constantly trying to restore peace while the other keeps disrupting it? That dynamic is rarely accidental, because constant instability shifts the focus away from accountability. Instead of asking, why has her behavior changed? You start asking, how do I stop upsetting her? And once a man reaches that point psychologically, he usually starts abandoning his own emotional boundaries just to keep the relationship alive. But listen to me carefully here. Peace should not feel impossible around someone who truly loves you. Yes, relationships require patience. Yes, human beings go through difficult seasons. But when emotional instability becomes constant, when tension becomes daily, when your nervous system never feels safe anymore, something deeper is usually happening underneath the surface. And this is where emotional discipline matters most. Do not mirror her chaos. Do not scream louder to regain control. Do not lose your center trying to calm someone determined to create emotional storms, because the man who loses emotional control becomes easier to manipulate, easier to blame, and easier to emotionally exhaust. Stay grounded instead. Sometimes silence reveals more truth than another argument ever will. Because when peace disappears from a relationship, loyalty often disappeared long before the fighting began. And eventually, after enough confusion, enough tension, and enough sleepless nights, your body starts realizing what your mind has been trying to deny the entire time. The fifth hidden sign is the one most men try the hardest to silence. Your intuition already knows something is wrong, not because you found proof, not because you caught her in a lie, but because somewhere deep inside your body, the relationship no longer feels emotionally safe the way it once did. And that feeling can drive a man crazy. Because logic keeps fighting instinct. Your mind says, maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe I'm insecure. Maybe I'm just afraid of losing her. Meanwhile, your nervous system keeps sounding the alarm every single day. You notice little things you can't fully explain. Her energy feels different around you. Her warmth feels inconsistent. She's physically present, but emotionally absent. Conversations feel thinner now. Intimacy feels disconnected. Even her silence feels unfamiliar somehow. And the hardest part is this. Most men keep waiting for undeniable proof before they allow themselves to trust what they already feel. That delay destroys them emotionally. Because by the time clear evidence finally appears, the relationship is often already dead emotionally. The betrayal happened internally long before it became visible externally. This is why I tell men not to ignore emotional patterns simply because they cannot explain them perfectly with logic yet. Human beings are constantly reading behavioral shifts subconsciously. Tone changes, timing changes, emotional availability, eye contact, attention, presence. Your body notices these things before your conscious mind catches up. That uneasy feeling in your chest is not always paranoia. Sometimes it's pattern recognition happening beneath the surface. And women know this better than most men realize. That's why some women will repeatedly tell you you're imagining things while their behavior keeps quietly changing at the same time. They know if they can make you doubt your own instincts long enough, they gain more emotional freedom without consequences. So the man starts gaslighting himself. He ignores the emotional distance, ignores the tension, ignores the inconsistencies. He keeps asking for reassurance from the same person creating the confusion in the first place. And that cycle drains a man psychologically. You stop trusting your own perception. You become anxious, hyper-alert, emotionally exhausted. You overanalyze texts, overanalyze tone, overanalyze silence, and eventually the relationship starts consuming your peace from the inside out. But here's the truth most men desperately need to hear. Real love does not constantly make you feel emotionally unsafe. Love can be difficult sometimes. Relationships require effort. But genuine loyalty creates emotional stability, not endless confusion. A woman who truly values you protects the emotional security between you. She does not slowly destroy it while demanding you ignore what you feel. That's why your intuition matters. Not because intuition is magical, but because emotional patterns always reveal themselves before people fully confess them with words. And I'm not telling you to become paranoid or suspicious of every woman. I'm telling you to stop abandoning yourself emotionally just because you don't have courtroom-level evidence yet. Sometimes your peace leaving the relationship is the evidence. Read that again. Sometimes your peace leaving the relationship is the evidence. Because when a man constantly feels anxious beside a woman who once made him feel calm, something fundamental has shifted emotionally. And this is the final lesson most men learn too late. You do not need her confession to protect yourself. You do not need perfect proof to stop tolerating emotional destruction. You do not need another argument just to validate what your soul has already been screaming at you for months. What you need is courage. The courage to trust what repeated behavior is showing you. The courage to stop begging for clarity from someone benefiting from your confusion. And most importantly, the courage to protect your peace before betrayal destroys your identity completely. Because the strongest men are not the men who expose every lie. They are the men who refuse to lose themselves trying to chase the truth from someone committed to hiding it. Most women do not wake up one morning and suddenly betray a relationship out of nowhere. Emotional betrayal usually begins quietly. First, the energy changes, then the respect weakens. Then the confusion starts growing inside the man who can feel something slipping away, but keeps trying to convince himself everything is fine. That's why these 5 signs matter. The fake transparency, the sudden accusations, the disappearing respect, the constant emotional chaos, and finally, the intuition you keep trying to silence because you're waiting for proof that may come far too late. And I want you to understand something deeply tonight. A man rarely destroys himself because a woman lied to him. He destroys himself when he keeps abandoning his own instincts to hold on to someone already emotionally leaving the relationship. That's the real damage, not the cheating itself. The slow erosion of your self-trust. Because once a man stops trusting what he feels, he becomes easier to manipulate, easier to control, and easier to emotionally break. So stop begging for clarity from people benefiting from your confusion. Stop chasing reassurance while your peace keeps disappearing. And stop thinking love means tolerating endless anxiety just to avoid losing someone. Real loyalty does not force you to betray yourself emotionally in order to keep the relationship alive. If this video spoke to you, comment, "I trust actions more than words." And if you know another man silently struggling through this kind of emotional confusion, share this with him. Subscribe if you want deeper insights into female psychology, emotional manipulation, and the hidden relationship patterns most men never see until it's too late. A woman who truly values you protects your peace. She never slowly destroys it